Well, at least, I mean, at least among the specialists on the topic, people who are on the scene, been following it closely, intelligence and so on, there seems to be almost complete agreement on the answer to the first question. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, some of them, and wealthy people in the Gulf dictatorships, but primarily Saudi Arabia, with direct funding, but more significantly with the missionary zeal with which Saudi Arabia, the most radical fundamentalist Islamic state in the world, promulgates its extremist Wahhabi Salafi doctrines with funding, with madrasas, Quranic schools, mosques, radical clerics, and just ideological pronouncements. In fact, one of the most expert commentators, Patrick Coburn, describes what he calls the Wahhabization of Sunni Islam as one of the most dangerous developments of the modern era. Now, that's the early stages. When the Saudi Arabian government began to recognize that ISIS is a potential threat to them, they stopped, at least publicly, I don't know what they're doing privately, funding and claimed to be against it. Meanwhile, there are other ugly alliances forming. So take Turkey. Turkey is almost openly supporting the Al-Nusra Front, Ahrar al-Islam, the other, which are really not, they're not ideologically different from ISIS. They're fighting turf battles as to who picks up the pieces, but very similar organizations. In fact, Turkish support for Al-Nusra seems to be so extreme that there's pretty good evidence that when the United States recently infiltrated a couple of dozen trained people who had been trained by the United States into Syria, they were quickly attacked and destroyed by an Al-Nusra attack, which apparently was, the details were leaked through Turkish intelligence, so it seems. And there's other very ugly alliances. Qatar's playing its own game and so on. But I think the basic source of the funding and the ideology traces back to the radical Islamist sources in the Gulf, primarily Saudi Arabia, which has had a pernicious effect on the whole region. It's not the only source, but one of them. Another source of ISIS, which we should not overlook, is the U.S. invasion of Iraq, which did, as I mentioned, instigate sectarian conflicts, which hadn't existed before the invasion, but became extremely serious in Iraq and are wrecking the country. It has now spread throughout the region. They're tearing it to shreds. I mean, when you hit fragile systems with a sledgehammer, unpleasant things can happen. Well, I don't think ISIS is going to expand much. There's a little movement around the periphery, but if you look at them geographically, they've spread to what seem to be pretty natural boundaries. The Sunni areas where they can gain a measure of local support, and like it or not, they do seem to be gaining a measure of local support, where maybe people don't like them or even hate them, but still see them as some sort of defense against other forces who they fear even more. And of course, they're attracting jihadi elements from around the world, young people who are disillusioned, desperate, want to have some meaning in their lives, all sorts of reasons. And I suspect they've kind of expanded to pretty much the natural boundaries. Whether they'll be beaten back by foreign attacks, we don't know. In fact, it's a very mixed story. So take in Syria, and in fact in Iraq, the main forces attacking ISIS on the ground or defending areas from them are enemies of the United States. It's the Kurdish groups, YPK, which is an ally of the PKK, which is an enemy of the United States. When ISIS was beginning to encroach on Iraqi Kurdistan, it was beaten back by PKK and Iranian-backed Shiite militias. That's called in the United States Iranian destabilization or Iranian aggression, meaning they were protecting people from ISIS. Turkey's attack, Turkey made a deal with the United States. I mean, if the United States didn't understand what was happening, it's stupidity beyond belief. I presume they understood. The deal was that the U.S. would get access to eastern Turkish air bases, which they want very badly, and in return, Turkey would attack ISIS. However, what Turkey did, of course, is attack the Kurds, who are the ground force opposing ISIS. That's what's going on right now. So what will happen out of this crazy, the other force opposing ISIS is the Assad regime. Horrible regime, but doesn't change the fact. And what can come, it's hard to imagine anything decent emerging from this. The only hope, it's a thin hope, is some kind of negotiated settlement in Syria, which would, like it or not, include the Assad regime. There's just no way for a negotiation to take place without that. They're not going to say it will commit suicide. So if you want to end it, and it has to be ended just for the sake of kind of human decency, it's destroying the country, the population, it must be a negotiated settlement which involves the Assad murderers, which is what they are, in a negotiated settlement. That's no way out of that.